Within the year 2023, Universal Orlando Resort would host its most anticipated marquee event, Halloween Horror Nights, now entering its 32nd year. This year would seek to bring all new terrifying concepts to life surrounding popular horror intellectual properties and all new original nightmares, all while a Halloween Horror Nights icon makes their grand entrance. Beware when entering the fog, because the oddities and monsters that live inside will leave you horrified. In creating Halloween Horror Nights 32, Universal Creative would serve up a new group of offerings, continuing its strategy of popular horror IPs being adapted into haunted houses, and creating new, original stories. Its headline IP to market the event would see the return of the massively popular Netflix sci-fi horror series Stranger Things, adapting its 4th season into an all-new haunted house. Other IPs to be featured would also be returning acts such as Chucky the Killer Doll and The Exorcist, but also see a new house based off the acclaimed video game The Last of Us. Though the haunted houses will consist of many intellectual properties to help market the event, within the gates of Universal Studios Florida, an original icon would manifest all the horror inside, and it would be the first time guests would get to encounter a character who has been involved with Halloween Horror Nights for over 20 years. This icon would be Jack the Clown's former ringmaster and eventual murderer, Dr. Oddfellow. Before the 2023 event, Dr. Oddfellow was first mentioned at Halloween Horror Nights 10, where he killed Jack in the long past for his committed crimes while involved in his circus. He would eventually be returned to favor by the Killer Clown as he took his prized possession, the Cane of Souls, in the Carnival of Carnage storyline. But now, guests would get to know more about the man behind the event's first infamous icon. Dr. Rich Oddfellow was a charismatic circus entrepreneur who ran many troupes back in the early 1900s. However, these circuses would be a guise for more sinister intentions, as Oddfellow was dabbling in dark sorcery, looking to unlock the key to immortality. The maniacal ringmaster sorcery would come from the power of the Zodiac, where evil deities would grant the power of immortality to its user, as long as they offered as many sacrifices to the Zodiac dimension. This power would be harnessed within his Cane of Souls, and which was always in his possession. These sacrifices would be orchestrated during Oddfellow's circus, where Jack the Clown would be his star performer. This would lead us to the death of Jack the Clown, as after killing him, Oddfellow was able to conquer the Zodiac dimension, morphing himself into many creatures and beings over time, until he would encounter the resurrected Jack, being ultimately defeated. It's explained that Jack was able to return into the world of the living, as when Oddfellow was attempting to kill him, Jack was able to claw at his face, causing blood of Oddfellow to fall onto Jack, imbuing him with the immortality his ringmaster had gained over his many rituals. With Dr. Oddfellow's death, his soul was sent to the Zodiac dimension, where he no longer had control over, and was banished to suffer for eternity. However, over time, he would reclaim his power, as Jack again was contained into his cursed box, allowing Oddfellow to break out of his eternal hell, reclaiming his Cane of Souls. With his return, he would find his way to this year's event, seeking to offer immortality to unknowing guests, only to be a false truth to strengthen his own power of everlasting life. With the icon finally having an expanded backstory, guests would get to encounter Oddfellow's rise to immortality, as this year's Scare Zones would stage his many sinister encounters over time. There would also be an original haunted house dedicated to the icon, reenacting the exact moment he reached immortality. All that said, Halloween Horror Nights 32 would consist of 48 event nights, 5 more than previous, and consist of 10 haunted houses, 5 scare zones, and 1 live show, as guests would get to encounter Dr. Oddfellow's many oddities and look to escape the horror that lurks within the fog. First, discussing the haunted houses of the 2023 Halloween Horror Nights event, the 10 created would be a mix of experiences featuring today's popular horror and original terrifying concepts. The first house would be located inside Soundstage 23 and be an original concept based off a colonial age cult, as it would be titled Blood Moon Dark Offerings. Within, guests enter the village of Parishtown, where a cult of moon worshippers celebrate the night of the blood moon, which requires these crazed cultists to sacrifice any non-believers, leaving guests with no hope of escape. The second house would be placed inside Soundstage 22 and be based off the 2023 Blumhouse Productions feature film The Exorcist Believer, sharing the same name. Inside, guests would get to witness the events of the film as they experience the many sinister forces that torture the young characters in the story, while guests are left to suffer the same horror. Similar to the 2009 house The Wolfman, this house would serve as a preview to the film, as it wouldn't be released until halfway through the event's run. The next house would be inside Soundstage 23 alongside Blood Moon Dark Offerings, and be the third house to be based off the popular Netflix series Stranger Things, maintaining the same title from its previous iterations. Here, guests get to enter the most recent season of the show as they come face to face with its most horrifying villain yet, Vecna, as they seek to escape his grasp, all while they encounter the other evils from the upside down. The fourth house of the event would be located in Soundstage 24 and be based off a former Universal Orlando attraction, as it would be called Dueling Dragons Choose Thy Fate. Just as mentioned, this house would serve as a prequel to the Islands of Adventure opening day attraction Dueling Dragons, where inside, guests would be caught in the epic battle between Warlocks Pyrock and Blizzrock as they witness their transformation into the sinister dragons guests encountered over 20 years ago, left to make the dreadful choice once again where no one wins. The most interesting element of this house was towards the end of it, as guests would get to choose between 2 different paths, fire or ice, leading to a different ending, allowing for a unique experience. The next house would also be inside Soundstage 24 and be a sequel to the 2019 house Yeti Terror of the Yukon, as this iteration would be called Yeti Campground Kills. Here, guests visit the Shadow Creek State Park in the 1950s, where a tribe of Yetis have found their way onto the campgrounds, looking to cause chaos and death all about. Yeti Campground Kills would win House of the Year for 2023. The sixth house would be placed inside the Fast and Furious Supercharged queue and see the return of an horror icon, Chucky the Killer Doll, as this house would be called Chucky Ultimate Kill Count. Here, guests enter the newest haunted house inspired by the Killer Doll's newest television series, in which Chucky highly dislikes as there is no real kills inside, but now he has taken over, possessing everything inside, and guests look not to become a part of his ultimate kill count. The next house would be located within Sprunk Tent 2 and be the icon house for Dr. Oddfellow, as it would be titled Dr. Oddfellow's Twisted Origins. Within, Guests would enter Oddfellow's grand circus and exposition, where all his carnies and oddities stalk throughout as guests become sacrifices for his ultimate goal of immortality. Many Halloween Horror Nights Easter eggs would be found inside the house, but most importantly, guests would get to witness the moment that Oddfellow kills Jack the Clown and gains his power of immortality. The 8th house would be located inside Sprung Tent 1 and be an original concept following a deal gone wrong, as it would be called the Darkest Deal. Here, guests follow the story of Pine Straw Spruce, a blues musician who sells his soul to the collector who grants him fame and glory. However, the price to pay is high, as guests find him being haunted by evil entities throughout, and see his debt be fulfilled as he descends into the collector's domain. The 9th house of the event would be within the second parade warehouse and be based off the 2013 PlayStation video game The Last of Us, sharing the same name. Guests would find themselves inside the apocalyptic world of the game as they follow the main protagonists, Joel and Ellie, as they fight off other survivors and the dangerous infected clickers and bloaters, leaving everybody inside with no hope of escape. The final house would be located in the first parade warehouse and be another edition featuring the classic Universal monsters, as this iteration would be called Universal Monsters Unmasked. This year's edition, guests would find themselves in the Paris catacombs as they encounter a new batch of Universal monsters: the Invisible Man, the Phantom of the Opera, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as they stalk guests throughout and look to create chaos for all who enter. This would be the entire Haunted House lineup for the 2023 event, being a collection of faithful IP adaptations and introducing terrifying new original concepts. As mentioned earlier, all 5 scare zones for this year's event would revolve around Dr. Oddfellow's encounters throughout time and all the carnage he would inflict. The first scare zone would be located in the front lot of the park and be Oddfellow's grand entrance, as it would be titled Dr. Oddfellow's Collection of Horror. Here, guests are welcomed into the event by Dr. Oddfellow and his many twisted creations as he tries to gather as many followers as possible to strengthen his power of immortality. The next zone would be placed within the New York section and also serve as the third iteration of the Vamp Scare Zone, as it would be called Vamp 69 Summer of Blood. Here, guests find themselves attending the 1969 Summer Music Fest, where Dr. Oddfellow has unleashed a clan of hungry vampires who are ready to gather as many bodies as possible to satisfy their hunger. Oddfellow would appear within, disguised as a vampire performer, looking to absorb all of the fallen souls. This scare zone would also be the location of this year's tribute store, being themed to a comic book shop, where each room would be themed to original comic book stories containing all of this year's merchandising. The third scare zone would be located in the San Francisco area and be set in a monstrous shipping yard, as it would be called Shipyard 32 Horror Unhinged. Here, guests now find themselves in a 1940s San Francisco, where Dr. Oddfellow owned a warehouse on Shipyard 32, where he housed all of his various twisted creatures inside, but now they have escaped, and guests now have to fend for themselves as all the monsters wreak chaos throughout. Oddfellow could be found as one of the monsters inside the scare zone, bearing his infamous face scars as the Screecher. The next zone would be located within the Central Park section and be a semi-sequel to the 2003 haunted house Jungle of Doom, as now this iteration would be titled Jungle of Doom Expedition Horror. Here, guests enter a mysterious jungle in the 1920s, where Dr. Oddfellow has discovered a crystal skull that can grant him power over living souls, in which he experiments here as he has twisted all the wildlife to his will, unleashing them to attack anything that enters. The crystal skull that Oddfellow discovers in this zone would later sit on top of his cane of souls, the main source of his power. The final scare zone would be placed in the Hollywood area of the park and be set within the Zodiac dimension, as it would be called Dark Zodiac. Here, guests enter the dimension where Dr. Oddfellow's power resides from, as twisted versions of the Zodiac signs lure guests in, strengthening his power even more than before. This is the only zone where Dr. Oddfellow wouldn't be featured in, as it is only consisted of the twisted Zodiac monstrosities. Along with the scare zones, in random areas around the park on each night, guests could encounter a roaming horde of Megans, the killer animatronic featured in the 2023 film, as they performed a dance routine and took pictures with guests. Aside from the street atmosphere, there would be one entertainment offering for the event, being located within the Fear Factor stage, and be the third iteration of the show Halloween Nightmare Fuel, as this version would be called Nightmare Fuel Revenge Dream. The show would continue to be a sinister spectacle as performers ignite the night with many death-defying acts, all to the muse of pulse-pounding music. This would be the entire lineup for the 2023 event, creating elaborate interconnected scare zones and a crowd-pleasing show. Halloween Horror Nights 32 would be another solid addition to the history of the event, as it would continue to create incredible adaptations of popular horror media, but also include elaborate original storytelling, as it would expand upon Horror Nights lore by telling Dr. Oddfellow's long history. But as Dr. Oddfellow gathers all his souls and continues his quest for ultimate immortality, the fog would fade away, only to return in the next year, where we would truly get to see where horror lives.